علي بن الحسين وعلى أولاد الحسين.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الذين قالوا لإخوانهم وقعدوا لو أطاعونا ما قتلوا قل فادرءوا عن أنفسكم الموت إن كنتم صادقين. ولا تحسبن الذين قتلوا في سبيل الله أمواتا بل أحياء عند ربهم يرزقون. فرحين بما آتاهم الله من فضله ويستبشرون بالذين لم يلحقوا بهم من خلفهم ألا خوف عليهم ولا هم يحزنون. الذين قالوا لإخوانهم وقعدوا لو أطاعونا ما قتلوا قل فادرءوا عن أنفسكم الموت إن كنتم صادقين. ولا تحسبن الذين قتلوا في سبيل الله أمواتا بل أحياء ولا تحسبن الذين قتلوا في سبيل الله أمواتا بل أحياء عند ربهم يرزقون فرحين بما آتاهم الله فرحين بما آتاهم الله من فضله ويستبشرون بالذين لم يلحقوا بهم من خلفهم ألا خوف عليهم ولا هم يحزنون يستبشرون بنعمة من الله وفضل يستبشرون بنعمة من الله وفضل وأن الله لا يضيع أجر المؤمنين الذين استجابوا لله والرسول من بعد ما أصابهم القرح للذين أحسنوا منهم واتقوا أجر عظيم الذين قال لهم الناس إن الناس قد جمعوا لكم فاخشوهم فزادهم إيمانا وقالوا حسبنا الله ونعم الوكيل الذين قال لهم الناس إن الناس قد جمعوا لكم فاخشوهم فزادهم إيمانا وقالوا حسبنا الله ونعم الوكيل فانقلبوا بنعمة من الله وفضل لم يمسسهم سوء واتبعوا رضوان الله والله ذو فضل عظيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وسيق الذين اتقوا ربهم إلى الجنة زمرا حتى إذا جاءوها وفتحت أبوابها وقال لهم خزنتها سلام عليكم طبتم فادخلوها خالدين. وسيق الذين اتقوا ربهم إلى الجنة زمرا حتى إذا جاءوها وفتحت أبوابها وقال لهم خزنتها سلام عليكم طبتم فادخلوها خالدين. وقالوا الحمد لله الذي صدقنا وعده وأورثنا الأرض نتبوأ من الجنة حيث نشاء فنعم أجر العاملين. وترى الملائكة حافين من حول العرش من حول العرش يسبحون بحمد ربهم وقضي بينهم بالحق وقيل الحمد لله رب العالمين. صدق الله العلي العظيم.
الحسين عليه السلام وارث آدم صفوة الله.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد يا من تحل به عقد المكاره ويا من يفتأ به حد الشدائد ويا من يلتمس منه المخرج إلى روح الفرج ذلت لقدرتك الصعاب وتسببت بلطفك الأسباب وجرى بقدرتك القضاء ومضت على إرادتك الأشياء فهي بمشيئتك دون قولك مؤتمرة وبإرادتك دون نهيك منزجرة أنت المدعو للمهمات وأنت المفزع في الملمات لا يندفع منها إلا ما دفعت ولا ينكشف منها إلا ما كشفت وقد نزل بي يا رب ما قد تكأدني ثقله وألم بي ما قد بغضني حمله وبقدرتك أوردته علي وبسلطانك وجهته إلي فلا مصدر لما أورد ولا صارف لما وجهت ولا فاتح لما أغلقت ولا مغلق لما فتحت ولا ميسر لما عسرت ولا ناصر لمن خذلت فصل على محمد وآله وافتح لي يا رب باب الفرج بطولك واكسر عني سلطان الهم بحولك وأنلني حسن النظر فيما شكوت وأذقني حلاوة الصنع فيما سألت وهب لي من لدنك رحمة وفرجا هنيئا واجعل لي من عندك مخرجا وحيا ولا تشغلني بالاهتمام عن تعاهد فروضك واستعمال سنتك فقد ضقت لما نزل بي يا رب ذرعا، وامتلأت بحمل ما حدث علي هما، وأنت القادر على كشف ما منيت به ودفع ما وقعت فيه، فافعل بي ذلك وإن لم أستوجبه منك يا ذا العرش العظيم وذا المن الكريم، فأنت قادر يا أرحم الراحمين. آمين رب العالمين. وصل يا رب على محمد وآله الطيبين الطاهرين.
Unique are your sacrifices, Zainab and Hussein. Unique are your sacrifices, Zainab and Hussein. O glorious progeny of Ahmad Ismail.
O glorious progeny of Ahmad Ismail.
You taught us that only before God we should kneel.
You taught us that only before God we should kneel.
That only if we feel the pain of others can we heal.
That only if we feel the pain of others can we heal.
The world needs your message of Tawheed and love again. Unique are your sacrifices, Zainab and Hussein. Unique are your sacrifices, Zainab and Hussein. To never surrender our freedom before tyranny.
To never surrender our freedom before tyranny.
To love mothers and daughters and defeat misogyny.
To love mothers and daughters and defeat misogyny.
With honor and righteousness fight every felony.
With honor and righteousness fight every felony.
Enlightened inspiration from your model can we gain. Unique are your sacrifices, Zainab and Hussein. Unique are your sacrifices, Zainab and Hussein. With liars and hypocrites you spoke with honesty.
With liars and hypocrites you spoke with honesty.
To inhuman savages you preached humanity.
To inhuman savages you preached humanity.
Responded to crudeness with sensitivity.
Responded to crudeness with sensitivity.
Your life in this world was like in a desert rain. Unique are your sacrifices, Zainab and Hussein. Unique are your sacrifices, Zainab and Hussein. Your method so discreet, your purpose reform.
Your method so discreet, your purpose reform.
To free the soul of Deen from hypocritical form.
To free the soul of Deen from hypocritical form.
Resisting those who wish to make exploitation a norm.
Resisting those who wish to make exploitation a norm.
And for these high ideals you would suffer any pain. Unique are your sacrifices, Zainab and Hussein. Unique are your sacrifices, Zainab and Hussein. You represented Allah's every prophet's legacy.
You represented Allah's every prophet's legacy.
Inherited the purity of Fatima Ali.
Inherited the purity of Fatima Ali.
But did the Ummah value these pillars of piety?
But did the Ummah value these pillars of piety?
They massacred one and paraded the other in chains. Unique are your sacrifices, Zainab and Hussein. Unique are your sacrifices, Zainab and Hussein.
Surah Al-Fatiha. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen Ar-Rahmanir Rahim. Maliki Yawmiddin. Iyaka na'budu wa iyaka nasta'een. اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين بارئ الخلائق أجمعين فاطر السماوات والأرضين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين المبعوث رحمة للعالمين شفيع المذنبين وحبيب قلوب الصادقين سيدنا ومولانا أبي القاسم محمد اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعلى أهل بيته الأطيبين الأطهرين الهداة المهديين ولعنة الله على أعدائهم إلى قيام يوم الدين. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي. أما بعد، فقد قال الله عز وجل في القرآن المجيد: بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله وكونوا مع الصادقين. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Over the last few days of the month of Muharram, we have talked about the message of Karbala and the lessons we learn from the character and the practice of our Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wa and Ahlul Bayt. And today is a time for us to collect those different messages and to think about what we are taking with us from the remembrance of Karbala in order to be able to live our life with a greater insight, a greater sincerity and devotion to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so in some ways, this majlis is of the greatest importance because it is not just a reminder of the tragedy and the martyrdom that we honor and we remember, but also of the effect and the benefit that we derive from that remembrance for the remainder of our life. And let me begin by mentioning one of those benefits of the remembrance of Karbala that I think is not exclusive to Muslims or to those who believe in Imam Hussein alayhi salam as an infallible Imam and a divinely appointed religious leader for the Muslims. That is the belief of the Shia and the followers of Ahlul Bayt. There are many Muslims who are not specifically the Shia of Ahlul Bayt, but they honor Imam Hussein as the grandson of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wa as a role model in terms of his knowledge and piety, and in particular because of the special love that our blessed Prophet showed to him, even if they don't consider him to be an Imam. And then there are many people who are not Muslims, but they honor Imam Hussein as a human being devoted to the values of dignity and justice and willing to sacrifice rather than compromise on those principles. And that is the lesson that I think is a universal lesson from Karbala. Even more than the courage, even more than the specific events that took place on the battlefield and before and after the battle, the one foundation of the movement of Karbala is the belief that sometimes there are struggles in life that are easy for us to solve. Let's say, for example, I have a temporary illness, I have, God forbid, an accident or a broken bone, and then with a few weeks or a few months of therapy, I can restore my health. I have a setback in my personal life, and maybe I had a loss in business or a loss of employment, and it'll take me a few months or a few years to get back on track. In different areas of our life, there are certain issues that we can solve within a relatively quick horizon, maybe a matter of days, weeks, months, a few years. But then there are some issues that are generational issues, that are not so easy to solve. Like, for example, if there is a belief among some members of society that their race or their ethnicity is superior to another race or ethnicity. That's a poisonous kind of a belief system. And it's not something that can be solved right away. 155 years after the end of the Civil War in the United States, there is still no resolution among society of many of the questions that caused that war to take place. There are still people who admire one side of that battle that believed in the superiority of one race, that believed in the justice of a cause that was based on exploitation of a large part of their population. And in fact, to be entirely fair, on both sides of that war there were people who believed in that inhuman and racist ideology. But that issue, it still is there in society and causing divisions in our present time. And if we speak about reparations, if we speak about undoing some of those historical injustices, then you'll find that that conversation is not in the mainstream in society. There are people who talk about the need to address the historical and the structural reasons for the racism and the suffering in society. But in politics, in policy, in society, that is not in the mainstream. And even if we're not talking about reparations, even if we're not talking about the righting of those historical wrongs, but even the recognition that there were historical wrongs that were committed, this is not something that we find is done. The heroes that much of this society admires are people who, if they existed in any other society, would be called criminals, would be called tyrants, would be called agents of genocide and mass murder. But here, there are schools, there are statues, there are roads, there are other institutions that are named after those people. And my point is not to pick on any one history or any one society. The point is that that wrong and injustice is a historical injustice. It requires a change in public perception. And at one time or another, it might be a minority of people who are willing to sacrifice their comfort, their political interests, their material interests to rock the boat and say that this is just, even if it's not easy, even if it's not popular, but it is just. And to give an example even closer to our own time, President Obama was elected in 2008. He assumed office in 2009 after the administration of George W. Bush. And many people in America felt that the policies of the Bush administration were based on lies. Today, there is no reasonable dispute that the Iraq War was based not on faulty intelligence, but based on falsified intelligence, that it was an immoral war, that it was an immensely destructive war. It destroyed Iraq. The birth defects, the loss of infrastructure, the loss of life that started then continues even till today. And it followed from other unjust policies. And this was one of the reasons that Obama was elected, that he was opposed to that war, as were the majority of American people. That's also one reason why President Obama won a Nobel Peace Prize so soon after being elected. But surprisingly, although there is a consensus now, and there was a consensus then, that this was an institutional failure of intelligence, of the military, of politics, that allowed a policy to be carried out which was destructive to the rights and the well-being of people in Iraq, people in the Middle East, and even to the interests of this country and this society. There was no accounting for that failure. And President Obama said that we're going to look to the future, not to the past. So people who denied enemy combatants or detainees their civil rights, people who engaged in enhanced interrogation techniques, which were actually a form of torture, were not prosecuted, were not held to account. People who caused so much loss of life in Iraq and abused the civilians and detainees, they were not held to account, or if it was a very limited kind of a low-level prosecution, certainly not wide-ranging. Why is it that a society knows and even can say that this was wrong, but then does not say that we need to take account of that wrong? We need to make up for it. We need to compensate those whose rights were taken away. And as a first step, at the very least, we need to admit what was the crime that was committed and what was the scale of that abuse or that crime. This is the message of Karbala that we as Muslims and we as followers of Ahlul Bayt believe in above all else. And this is why we commemorate Karbala even after 1400 years. It is because we believe that when there is an injustice, then equilibrium in the world cannot be established until that injustice is made right. And the greater the injustice, the greater the need to restore that equilibrium, the greater the need to make right that wrong in order for the world to once again be healthy and be whole. And the greatest wrong that can be committed is not against the material rights or the material interests of people or of existence, but it is against the spiritual rights and the spiritual interests of people and other beings in existence, because the material world is meant to eventually come to an end anyway. Material abuse and crimes are great crimes. They're unspeakable and unpardonable crimes. But no matter what you do to my material being, you're doing it in my material, in my physical life. And my lifespan, even if I'm not oppressed, even if I am not abused, is a limited lifespan. Nobody has a right to take away the rights of another person, to abuse another person. But if they abuse their physical person, that is one level of an abuse. If they abuse their soul and their spiritual rights and dignity, that is an even greater abuse, because the soul is eternal. And to deprive the soul of its spiritual rights, dignity, and potential is to abuse that eternal aspect of our being and our existence. And so the greatest crime that can be committed is a crime that is against the soul, against the values of humanity, not just against the person of humanity. The greatest crime of Yazid and his army in Karbala was not that they killed Imam Hussein alayhi salam in a brutal manner. It is not that they deprived Imam Hussein of food and water or safety. Those were great crimes, but they were the physical level of the crime. The greatest crime is that those enemies deprived Imam Hussein of his spiritual position as a guide, as a teacher, as a leader, as a role model for the Muslims and for humanity. And he deprived the human existence of their access to that medicine for their soul, that source of enlightenment and guidance and teachings. And as Muslims, we don't believe that because that injustice is not easy to fix, that we can forget it. We don't believe that because it's bad for the economy or it's inconvenient or uncomfortable to talk about war crimes and how to make up for those abuses, that we're not going to do it. We don't believe that because slavery was a long time ago and we've moved on, that therefore we have a right to ignore the effects of those injustices in our present time. What we believe is that if something is true, if something is a matter of value and principle, then it is valuable regardless of time. And that message of Karbala, that principle that you should remember and you should want to fix those things that are a matter of truth and falsehood, that is in many ways the most universal and the most beautiful part of the message of Karbala. Sometimes people say, Imam Hussein died a long time ago, why are you still mourning today? This is why we mourn, because we believe that there was an injustice that was done, and it was a grave injustice against the command of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, against the rightful place of Ahlul Bayt, against the spiritual as well as the material well-being and interests of all of creation and of humanity. And that grave crime is the cause of our separation from God, our separation as human beings from our ability and our potential to create a just society. That can only come when we have access to the teachings of God that are meant to give us a dignified and a good life. So my message is not political or specifically about injustices that exist in one country or another country. My message is about the difference between a worldview that prioritizes principle and a worldview that prioritizes practicality. When I, as a Muslim, see an injustice that seems too big for me to solve, that seems so widespread or so great that I might not be able to see a way in which it can be cured or fixed in my lifetime, then my response is to derive inspiration from Karbala and say that I will take a stand for what is right. I will remember what is true, what is worth standing up for and worth fighting for. And through my remembrance, through my honoring that principle, I will keep alive that candle of guidance. And then Allah has a plan for humanity, Allah has a plan for history. It doesn't matter to me whether the problem is solved in 10 years or in 1,000 years, because that is not in my control. But I keep that principle alive. We keep alive the remembrance of Karbala because it is important, because it is true, because it is just. And that is why we still have the pain and the commemoration of the suffering of Imam Hussein alayhi salatu wassalam. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. So, to summarize, there are societies that are characterized by practical thinking and by convenience. And as a Muslim, we should be practical. We should not live in a dream world, but we also should not forget our ideals. We should be realistic and practical while remembering our principles and our ideals. And that is what Karbala is for us. It is a reminder that salvation, that tranquility, that peace of mind comes from knowing what is our potential as a human being. And that potential is not how good I can learn to play a certain sport, how much I can become an expert at a specific skill, how good a cook I can become. My potential is not how much money I can earn or how famous I can become or how many followers I can have on social media or how many likes I can have for a particular post I might make. My potential is defined by my spiritual ability to come close to God, to come close to Allah, to perfect my spirituality. And that potential requires the guidance of God and the teachings of Prophet Muhammad and Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salatu wassalam. And therefore, I am not defined by material considerations. I'm not going to only tackle those problems that are easy for me to solve in 5 minutes or 5 years. But I will work for those goals that tie closely to my values, that are related to the Prophet and Ahlul Bayt, and that are related to material well-being as well as spiritual well-being as taught by the Prophet and Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salatu wassalam. And then I will trust that Allah will help me solve those problems. Now, if somebody is not a follower of Ahlul Bayt, if somebody is not a Muslim, then some of the things that they consider to be their ideals or their values or their beliefs might be different from mine. But all human beings, regardless of what school of thought they follow, regardless of what religion they follow, regardless of if they even follow a religion or don't follow a religion, they can learn and be inspired by that principle that what you believe in is something that you should be willing to sacrifice for. It is something that you should remember. And if the challenge seems great, if the injustice seems great, if the opposition seems like it is widespread, then that shouldn't let you forget that those are just the surface. And there is a deeper force of justice in the universe, and that is what we as Muslims say is the purpose and the hand of God. Karbala is a commemoration of grief. And in the first 10 days of Muharram, we grieve. so that we can absorb the true pain of the loss of Imam Hussein alayhi salam. What was the extent of that tragedy, so we feel that as a human being in every fiber of our body, in every part of our soul. But then after those 10 days, we also have to translate that feeling of grief and sadness to a reminder that we should devote ourselves to work for a better world, to work for justice, to work for the establishment of the teachings that God has given me and that God wants me to establish. I love Imam Hussein by repenting of my own sins and shortcomings, by taking care of my personal religious obligations that Allah has commanded me to take care of, by avoiding those things that Allah has said, I forbid you from doing, and that Allah has told us are harmful for our body or for our soul. I honor Imam Hussein by making sure that I don't have the attributes of arrogance or selfishness or stinginess that Allah has said are unworthy of a believer. That I develop the attributes that Allah has said that I should try to develop within myself of courage, of honesty, of humility, of piety. I honor Karbala by avoiding committing an injustice, by avoiding supporting an injustice, by avoiding remaining silent in the face of injustice, and by speaking out and working towards the strengthening and the establishment of justice in my world and to the extent of my power. And I honor Imam Hussein alayhi salam by remembering that all of these things that I described are not my mission, but they are the message of Allah. And so I am working to fulfill His purpose and to honor the covenant that Allah has given us as human beings. So I never lose hope. I never become discouraged. I never retire. I never say that I have done enough, nor do I ever burn out, because this is what the purpose and the mission of life is. I want to conclude by just mentioning a few points about the ways in which we can keep that struggle present in our life. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. One is that we have to honor our family relations. In this society, we are often pulled towards our own individual wants. There are people who prefer their individual happiness even over their marriage and their family. There are people who prefer their individual whim or desire over the rights of their spouse, their children, their parents, and other loved ones. In Islam, we are taught that our individuality is a gift given to us by Allah. Our existence, our individual being and our soul and our senses and our intellect, these are all a gift given to us by Allah. But the other relationships in our life are also a gift and a test given to us by Allah. And so it is by honoring those relationships that we worship Allah and honor Allah, and that we also develop ourselves, that our own individual self becomes more enlightened and grows. So as a Muslim, it is essential that I develop a sense of obligation to my relatives, to my family in particular, to my parents, my children, if I'm married, to my spouse. These are not just our personal relationships. These are not just up to us, but they are divine gifts and a divine trust that we have been given. And so I love my parents, I love my children, I honor my relationship to them, not because it makes me feel good, not because it gives me benefit, but because this is how I thank Allah and I express to Allah that I appreciate what He has commanded and what He has taught me to do. The foundation of a struggle for justice, the foundation of concern for the well-being of humanity must begin with our sense of connectedness and obligation to our family and our nearest and dearest people in our lives. So that is the teaching of Ahlul Bayt. And we see this throughout the life of our Prophet. The love that Prophet Muhammad showed to Imam Ali, to Lady Fatima, to Imam Hassan, Imam Hussein, Lady Zainab, Kulthum. Although he was busy throughout his day as a prophet, as a counselor, as a teacher, as a governor, as a military commander, and so many other roles that the Prophet fulfilled for society. But he made sure that he conveyed a message and he had a close connection with his family. It may not have been a lot of time, but that was the basis of all of the grace that we find in the family and the progeny of the Prophet ﷺ. If Imam Ali was an example for us of all of the best morals a human being can have, if Lady Fatima salamullahi alayha was an example for all of the highest and most sublime attributes a human being can develop, and if Imam Hassan and Imam Hussein and Lady Zainab and Kulthum are inspiring for us in their words and in their life story, this is because of their connection to Prophet Muhammad and the teaching and the blessing that Prophet Muhammad brought to them. So let us commit that we will give more importance and more love and honor to our family members, not with any expectation, not because of what benefit is going to come back to us, but because this is how we honor Allah and we fulfill His wish and His command. The other and final point that I would like to mention is that we have to keep both feet firmly planted on the ground. Sometimes what happens in life is that we move beyond our basic needs. Allah blesses us. Sometimes people earn a good income that they didn't have access to before. They have more money than they used to have before. Sometimes people may come into a windfall. They may inherit a large sum of money, or they may earn a good profit in business, or they may get a promotion and now they have more time, more authority, whatever form of blessing we have. Or on the other side, whatever hardship we may have. If I had a good income and a good job, and then because of a recession, because of a layoff, because of a pandemic or other circumstances, if my material circumstances have changed, we have to have our feet planted on the ground. Neither should abundance make us think that now we are better than other people, nor should deprivation make us feel insecure, because we are creatures of Allah and He tests us at different times in our life in different ways. And Allah tests different people in different ways. If Allah gives somebody hardship, that doesn't mean Allah likes them less. In fact, He might like them more. And if somebody gives Allah plenty, that doesn't mean He likes them more or that He likes them less. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will love us on the basis of our character, on the basis of piety, inna akramakum indallahi atqakum, and not on the basis of our material circumstances. But those who have knowledge more than others, those who have wealth more than others, those who have a social position or prestige more than others do, they have a higher responsibility, because in many cases they are influential in setting a culture, a good culture or a bad culture. And so if I have been blessed by Allah, let me make a commitment that my concern is not going to be what more can I buy, what more can I enjoy, what more can I do for myself. We're not going to try to enrich our worldly life. We are going to try to enrich our spiritual life by investing in our hereafter, by investing in the development of our soul, and by investing in our community and our fellow human beings. And those two are the same thing. When we invest in others to help them and meet their needs, then we are investing in our own soul and in our own hereafter. And if I am facing hardship, then let me take inspiration from the example of our Imams, and in particular Imam Hussein alayhi salam, that even in hardship, even in adversity, even when surrounded by our enemy, we can be victorious. Nobody can defeat us, but our own lack of confidence and our own lack of trust in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So that final message and reminder is that let us keep both feet planted on the ground. Whatever circumstances life may throw at us, economically, politically, socially, personally, whatever circumstances we may be in, our most important thoughts, our greatest focus should be on how can I use the opportunity, the resources, the abilities that God has given me for the sake of my spiritual and my religious growth, to serve Allah better, to serve my fellow human beings better, to serve my religion and Islam better. That should be my first and my most important thought, and if I do so, then I will be loyal to the message and the teachings of Ahlul Bayt. After Ashura, we remember the sacrifices that were made by Ahlul Bayt. There was a battle that took place in Karbala, and that was a battle of martyrs. Many people went forward and they were honored by Allah with martyrdom. And we honor their sacrifice. But that entire battle was just over the space of a few hours in Karbala, no matter how severe and painful it was. But then after Karbala, the battle of the survivors begins. And this was a battle that did not take just hours on a single day. This was a battle that took weeks and months. And for those who lived after Karbala, it was a battle that continued for the rest of their lives. Imam Zainul Abidin lived after Karbala for almost 30 years. And every day of those 30 years he mourned and grieved. After Karbala was a time when those descendants of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and Ahlul Bayt, they were made captives. Their tents were burned, their possessions were taken, their hands and their feet were bound, and according to some narrations, even Their necks were tied in chains and ropes, and they were taken to Kufa, and they were taken to Damascus as captives. The hardships, the suffering, the indignity of that captivity is even greater a pain in the heart of Imam Zainul Abidin and Imam Baqir alayhi salam, who was a young child at that time, than the unspeakable tragedy of Ashura itself. You have all heard the hadith where Imam Zainul Abidin says that the greatest tragedy befell me not in Karbala, not in Kufa, Ash-Sham, 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 when I was in the court of Yazid, and the granddaughters of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the family of the Prophet, and I were in chains, and the people of Syria celebrated what they thought was their victory over Imam Hussein. But of course, the victory belongs to Imam Hussein alayhi salatu wassalam. And in Damascus, it is narrated that a person said to Imam Zainul Abidin that Yazid has won, and the proof of his victory is that you are in chains. And then in that same gathering where the Syrians were celebrating, there were 72 spears, and there were 72 heads raised on those spears, radiant, luminous. But the heads of the noble warriors of Karbala were presented to Yazid, and Yazid may have thought, the Syrians may have thought, that this was their victory over the Imam, their victory over truth. It was at that point that Imam Zainul Abidin said, I will tell you who was victorious. And then when the adhan began, the call to prayer, and in the adhan, the mu'adhin, the caller said, Ashhadu anna Muhammadan Rasulullah. I testify that Muhammad is the messenger of Allah. Imam Zainul Abidin said that so long as the adhan is recited, so long as there is a call to prayer, so long as the name of Muhammad is called by the Muslims and is remembered by the Muslims, then Yazid, you are defeated and we are victorious. Because the struggle of Imam Hussein was to keep alive the mention and the message of Muhammad, and to make sure that it could not be buried and that it could not be made to deviate according to the false teachings of the Umayyads. And this was the success of Imam Hussein and the success of those who survived Karbala and kept alive the message of Karbala, that still the religion of Islam is there and people have knowledge and access to the teachings, the pristine teachings of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wa alihi and Ahlul Bayt. May Allah keep us on the path of Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. May Allah accept the worship of all of those who love the Prophet and love the family of the Prophet. May Allah accept from all of those who devoted their time, their energy, their sincerity and their tears to serving the path of Ahlul Bayt, whether with our center or any other organization or center throughout the world. May Allah bless those who donated, who volunteered, who assisted in the carrying out of these programs of remembrance and commemoration. May Allah grant all of us the ability to do even more, and may He bless all of us and our families and all of humanity with His grace and with His guidance. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
King of martyrs, O Imam, man and jinn Mawla Hussein, Sayyid al-Shuhada, Imam al-Insi wal-Jinnah Hussein, infant Abdullah and Ali Akbar Hussein. Oh, in his return of Adam, father of freedom Hussein. Marhaba ya Aba Abdullah wa Ali Akbar Hussein. وارث الآدم أبو الأهرار إمامي يا حسين. King of martyrs, oh Imama, من الجن مولا حسين. سيد الشهداء إمام الإنس والجن حسين. You established prayer and gave your everything in charity. You enjoined what was right and forbade iniquity. أنك قمت الصلاة أنك أتيت الزكاة قد أمرت بالمعروف ونهيت عن المنكرات. King of martyrs, oh Imama, من الجن مولا حسين. سيد الشهداء إمام الإنس والجن حسين. Mustafa said, you are from me, I from you, my son Hussein. Prince of paradise, you are a sanctuary, O Hussein. Al-Hussein minni kala wa ana min al-Hussein. Anta sayyidu ahli al-jannah was-safina ya Hussein. King of martyrs, O Imama, من الجن مولا حسين. سيد الشهداء إمام الإنس والجن حسين. Your avenger is Allah, your selector is Allah. Your contented soul a lamp of guidance in every era. Marhaba ya Thar Allah, Hirat Allah Mustafa. Anta nafsul mutmainna, Anta misbahul huda. King of martyrs, O Imama, من الجن مولا حسين. سيد الشهداء إمام الإنس والجن حسين.
السلام عليك يا وارث آدم صفوة الله. السلام عليك يا وارث نوح النبي الله. السلام عليك يا وارث إبراهيم خليل الله. السلام عليك يا وارث موسى كليم الله. السلام عليك يا وارث عيسى روح الله. السلام عليك يا وارث محمد حبيب الله. السلام عليك يا وارث أمير المؤمنين ولي الله عليه السلام. السلام عليك يا ابن محمد المصطفى. السلام عليك يا ابن علي المرتضى. السلام عليك يا ابن فاطمة الزهراء. السلام عليك يا ابن خديجة الكبرى. السلام عليك يا ثار الله وابن ثاره والوتر الموتور. أشهد أنك قد أقمت الصلاة وآتيت الزكاة وأمرت بالمعروف ونهيت عن المنكر وأطعت الله ورسوله حتى أتاك اليقين. فلعن الله أمة قتلت ولعن الله أمة ظلمتك ولعن الله أمة سمعت بذلك فرضيت. يا مولاي يا أبا عبد الله، أشهد أنك كنت نورا في الأصلاب والأرحام المطهرة، لم تنجسك الجاهلية بأنجاسها، ولم تلبسك من مدلهمات ثيابها. وأشهد أنك وأركان المؤمنين، وأشهد أنك الإمام البر التقي الرضي الزكي الهادي المهدي. وأشهد أن الأئمة من ولدك كلمة التقوى وأعلام الهدى والعروة الوثقى والحجة على أهل الدنيا. وأشهد الله وملائكته وأنبياءه ورسله أني بكم مؤمن وبإيابكم موقن بشرائع ديني وخواتيم عملي، وقلبي لقلبكم سل وأمري لأمركم متبع. وعلى أرواحكم وعلى أجسادكم وعلى أجسامكم وعلى شاهدكم وعلى غائبكم وعلى ظاهركم وعلى باطنكم. السلام على الحسين وعلى أولاد الحسين. الذين بذلوا مهجهم دون الحسين عليه السلام. سلامنا وامتناننا إلى أم أبيها. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. سبحان الله والحمد لله ولا إله إلا الله والله أكبر ولله الحمد. الله أكبر الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله. أشهد أن محمد رسول الله. صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم. أشهد أن محمدًا رسول الله. صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم. أشهد أن عليا ولي الله. صلوات الله وسلامه عليه. أشهد أن مولانا عليا أمير المؤمنين وأبناءه المعصومين حجج الله. حي على الصلاة. حي على الصلاة. حي على الفلاح. حي على الفلاح. حي على خير العمل. حي على خير العمل. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. لا إله إلا الله. لا إله إلا الله. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. اللهم كن لوليك الحجة ابن الحسن صلواتك عليه وعلى آبائه في هذه الساعة وفي كل ساعة وليا وحافظا وقائدا وناصرا ودليلا وعينا حتى تسكنه أرضك طوعا وتمتعه فيها طويلا. وإلى أرواح المؤمنين والمؤمنات والشهداء السعداء ومن مات بوباء وبلاء. رحم الله من يقرأ سورة الفاتحة تسبقها الصلاة على محمد وآل محمد.
كشف الغطاء وانقطع الرجاء وضاقت الأرض ومنعت السماء وأنت المستعان وإليك المشتكى وعليك المعول في الشدة والرخاء. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد أولي الأمر الذين فرضت علينا طاعتهم وعرفتنا بذلك منزلتهم ففرج عنا بحقهم فرجا عاجلا قريبا كلمح البصر أو هو أقرب. يا محمد يا علي يا علي يا محمد اكفياني فإنكما وانصراني فإنكما ناصران. يا مولانا يا صاحب الزمان الغوث أدركني 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 الساعة 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 العجلة 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 يا أرحم الراحمين بحق محمد وآله الطاهرين.
السلام عليك يا أبا عبد الله